For centuries, life along the Senegal River followed a rhythm older than any government plan, older than any modern development project, and older than any road cutting across the landscape. When the river rose, fields came alive. When the water pulled back, farmers planted sorghum in the rich soil left behind. Fishermen filled their nets. Herders moved their animals across the floodplain, and families gathered around meals prepared from crops they had grown themselves. Everything was connected: the river, land, food, and the people. Then a new promise was made. It was a promise of progress, food security, a promise that more rice would mean a better future. Suddenly, fields were transformed and irrigation canals spread across the landscape. Rice production expanded year after year. On paper, it looked like success, but beneath the surface, something else was happening. Plants began disappearing. Traditional foods became harder to find. Women found themselves carrying heavier burdens. Health problems started appearing more often, and an entire way of life slowly began to fade. This is the story of how one crop changed much more than agriculture. It changed culture, it changed diets, it changed communities, and it raises an important question that many countries face today. What happens when increasing production comes at the cost of everything else? In this video, we'll explore how rice transformed the Middle Senegal River Valley, what was lost along the way, and why this story matters far beyond Senegal. To understand what changed, we first need to understand what existed before. The Middle Senegal River Valley was not built around rice, it was built around diversity. The river flooded naturally every year. As the water spread across the floodplain, it created fertile land. When the water receded, farmers planted crops directly into the moist soil. One crop stood above all others: sorghum. It was more than food, it was history, it was tradition, it was identity. Families grew different varieties. Each variety had its own characteristics. Some matured quickly, others resisted birds, some were preferred for taste, others for storage. Women often held much of this knowledge. They knew which seeds to save, which crops worked best, which foods could feed a family during difficult times. But sorghum was only one piece of a larger system. Fishing provided protein. Livestock supplied milk and meat. Wild fruits grew in the surrounding landscape. Vegetables came from gardens and riverside plots. Together, these activities created a food system that was deeply connected to nature. People didn't depend on one crop. They depended on diversity. And that diversity created resilience. But then droughts arrived. Governments searched for solutions, and a major transformation began. Coming up next, we'll see how large-scale rice production reshaped an entire landscape. Beginning in the late 20th century, major infrastructure projects changed the Senegal River. Large dams were built and irrigation systems expanded. The goal seemed simple: produce more food, reduce dependence on imported rice, and strengthen national food security. Rice became the center of development plans. Large areas of land were converted for irrigation. Flood recession farming began losing space. Year after year, more land shifted toward rice production. Government agencies encouraged farmers to increase rice cultivation. New varieties were introduced, loans supported production, and development agencies invested heavily in expansion. From a distance, the numbers looked impressive. More rice was cultivated, more irrigated land, and more production. But numbers often hide details. And in the villages, people were noticing changes that statistics could not easily capture. The natural flood cycle became less important. Traditional farming practices became harder to maintain. Old relationships between land, water, livestock, and fishing began to weaken. The landscape was changing, and so were people's lives. The real story was only beginning. One of the first casualties of rice expansion was biodiversity. Not biodiversity in the abstract. Real plants, real foods, and real varieties that families had depended on for generations. Women interviewed in the region could still remember many sorghum varieties again. Some had almost disappeared from fields. Others survived only in memory. Seeds once passed from generation to generation have become increasingly rare. Traditional crops gradually lost space. Wild edible plants became harder to find. Fruit-bearing trees disappeared as landscapes were reorganized for irrigation. Many local foods that once appeared regularly in family meals became uncommon. And when crops disappear from fields, they often disappear from kitchens too. A food culture cannot survive without the plants that support it. The loss was not only biological, it was cultural. Recipes began fading, knowledge started disappearing. Younger generations had fewer opportunities to learn what their grandparents once knew. What looked like a change in agriculture was becoming a change in memory itself. But biodiversity was not the only thing under pressure. The people carrying much of this knowledge were also being affected. And that brings us to the women at the centre of this story. In many development stories, women appear only briefly. In reality, they often carry much of the system. That was true here. Women planted, weeded, harvested, processed food, managed seeds, prepared meals, protected family nutrition, and passed knowledge to future generations. As rice farming expanded, many of these responsibilities did not disappear. Instead, new work was added. Women continued caring for families while helping support the new agricultural system. Yet their role became less visible. Traditional knowledge that once gave them recognition carried less value in the new system. Several women described themselves in a new way as helpers and not decision makers. This label hides reality, because feeding a family requires expertise. Maintaining biodiversity requires expertise. Preserving food traditions requires expertise. The burden remained. The recognition often did not. This shift changed social relationships inside families and communities, and it would also affect what ended up on people's plates. Before we move into that session, here's a quick interruption.
If you're finding this deep dive valuable, verify that subscribe button is clicked. We're tracking the political economy of food and agriculture, so you don't miss the next video.
Now let's look at what happened to food itself. The most visible change was sitting right in front of people every day, on their plates. Rice became the dominant food. Families increasingly depended on it. Traditional cereals such as sorghum and millet became less common. Consumption patterns shifted dramatically. At first glance, this may not seem like a problem. Food is food, right? Not exactly. Different foods provide different nutrients, and diversity matters. Researchers found that many women were eating diets heavily dominated by rice and other refined grains. Meanwhile, consumption of vegetables, pulses, fish, and other nutrient-rich foods remain limited. The result was a growing nutritional imbalance. The older diet was far from perfect, but it contained more sorghum, millet, fish, vegetables, and diversities. Researchers even simulated what diets looked like decades earlier. The results suggested that older dietary patterns provided higher levels of important nutrients. The shift toward rice had consequences that extended beyond calories. And that leads us to an uncomfortable question. What happens when a food system produces more of one thing while providing less overall nutrition? The answer begins to appear in local health patterns. When communities talk about change, they often notice health effects before researchers do. Local residents spoke about rising concerns about diabetes, high blood pressure, and nutritional problems. Many women faced risks of deficiencies in important vitamins and minerals, iron, vitamin A, vitamin B12, and other essential nutrients. A diet dominated by refined grains can fill stomachs. But filling stomachs is not the same as nourishing bodies. This distinction is important because food security is often measured in terms of quantity. How much food exists, how much food is produced, but quality matters too. A system can produce large amounts of food and still leave people vulnerable to nutritional problems. This is one of the central lessons emerging from the Senegal River Valley. Production alone is not enough. Nutrition, diversity, and culture matters. And when those things disappear, the costs may not be immediately visible, but they are real. Perhaps the deepest losses cannot be measured in harvest statistics. They live in memories, in traditions, and in relationships. The older system connected people through exchanges in fish, milk, grain, knowledge, and labor. The flood cycle shaped social life. Communities adapted together. As that system weakened, many of those connections weakened too. Traditional recipes became rarer. Local celebrations changed. Knowledge once passed between generations became harder to preserve. Women spoke about foods they no longer prepared, plants they no longer grew, trees that had disappeared, and seeds that had become difficult to find. What vanished was not simply biodiversity. It was a cultural landscape, a way of understanding the world, a way of living with the river. And once such systems disappear, rebuilding them becomes extremely difficult. But this story is not simply about loss, it is also about resilience. Because many people in the valley continue trying to protect what remains. Here are some key takeaways. 1. More food production does not automatically mean better nutrition. 2. Women's knowledge plays a critical role in food security. 3. Development projects should consider environmental, social, cultural, and health impacts together. 4. Protecting local food traditions may be important as increasing agricultural output.
What stood out to you in this analysis? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read them and often build on viewer questions in future episodes. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, share, and stay curious about the systems that feed the world and the people who sustain them.